When billionaire heir Landon Cole is exiled to a struggling Nebraska farm, he expects mud and misery, not a fierce woman named Hallie who just might change everything. But when family secrets and foreclosure collide, will love be enough? Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. The bright flashes of camera lights nearly blinded Landon Cole as he stumbled out of the upscale Manhattan nightclub. His expensive designer shirt was wrinkled and stained with what looked like expensive champagne. At 38, Landon still had the good looks that made women stare, strong jawline, perfect teeth, and eyes that photographers loved to capture. But tonight those eyes were bloodshot and unfocused. "Mr. Cole, can you comment on your relationship with Victoria Winters?" a reporter shouted, shoving a microphone in Landon's face. Landon pushed the microphone away, nearly falling in the process. "Get that thing out of my face," he slurred. His bodyguard stepped between him and the reporters, guiding Landon toward the waiting black SUV. Once inside, Landon loosened his tie and leaned his head back against the leather seat. That was a disaster. His assistant, Jenny, said from the front seat, "Your father is going to see this all over tomorrow's papers." Landon waved his hand dismissively. "Let him see it. What's he going to do, cut me off? I'm almost 40 years old. He's still the CEO of Cole Corp, and you're still the face of the company," Jenny reminded him, her voice tight with frustration. This is the third scandal this month. First, there had been the car crash where Landon had totaled his $300,000 sports car. Then the leaked photos of him with Victoria Winters, a married actress. And now this, a drunken tirade caught on video by at least a dozen phones. "I don't care," Landon mumbled, closing his eyes. But he would care in the morning. And so would his father. Richard Cole's office took up the entire top floor of the Cole Corp building. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the New York skyline that most people only saw in movies. Richard stood with his back to the door, hands clasped behind him, as Landon entered. "Sit down," Richard said without turning around. Landon dropped into one of the leather chairs in front of his father's massive desk. His head was pounding, and he was wearing sunglasses indoors, partly to hide his hangover and partly to look unaffected by his father's summons. "Do you have any idea what your behavior is doing to this company?" Richard asked, finally turning to face his son. At 65, Richard Cole was still an imposing figure, tall, fit, with silver hair and cold blue eyes that had stared down countless business rivals. "It'll blow over," Landon said with a shrug. "It always does." Richard picked up a tablet from his desk and turned it to show Landon. On the screen was a graph showing Cole Corp's stock price dropping. "This is what happened this morning when the markets opened," Richard said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Your little performance last night cost this company millions." Landon shifted uncomfortably in his chair, but kept his expression neutral. "So hire a better PR team." Richard slammed the tablet down on his desk, making Landon jump. "I've had enough," Richard said. "You want to act like a man, then go work like one," Landon frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means you're going away for a while," Richard said, sitting down in his chair. "Somewhere the press can't find you. Somewhere you can learn what real work is." "You can't be serious," Landon scoffed. "I've never been more serious in my life," Richard said, sliding a folder across the desk. "You're going to a farm in Nebraska, a small operation called Maple Glen. The owners are old friends of mine. Well, the father was. He passed away recently. His daughter runs it now." Landon didn't touch the folder. "I'm not going to some farm in the middle of nowhere." "Yes, you are," Richard said firmly, "or I'll cut you off completely. No trust fund, no job at the company, no apartment, no cars. Nothing?" "You wouldn't," Landon challenged, but his voice lacked conviction. "Try me," Richard replied, his eyes hard. "You'll stay there until harvest season ends. No phone, no credit cards, nothing but the clothes on your back and a few necessities. You'll work like everyone else there." Landon stared at his father in disbelief. "This is insane." "No, what's insane is watching my son throw his life away," Richard said. "The jet leaves in 3 hours. Jenny has packed your things, the appropriate things for farm work. And don't even think about leaving once you get there. I have ways of knowing." Landon stood up, anger replacing his shock. "You can't control me like this." "I'm not controlling you, Landon. I'm saving you," Richard said, turning his attention to the papers on his desk. "Now get out of my office. Jenny will take you to the airport." The private jet landed on a small airstrip outside of Omaha. A driver was waiting to take Landon the rest of the way to Maple Glen Farm. After 2 hours of driving through seemingly endless fields, they turned onto a dirt road with a weathered wooden sign that read, "Maple Glen Farm, Esther 1932. Landon looked out the window with dismay. The farmhouse was large, but nothing like the luxury he was used to. It was a 2-story white house with a wraparound porch, surrounded by fields on all sides. Several outbuildings and a big red barn completed the picture. "This is a joke," Landon muttered as the car stopped in front of the house. The driver unloaded Landon's 2 bags, ordinary duffel bags, not his usual expensive luggage, and handed him an envelope. "Mr. Cole wanted me to give you this," the driver said before getting back in the car and driving away, leaving Landon standing alone in the dust. Landon opened the envelope. Inside was a note in his father's handwriting. "Learn something. Dad." "Learn something?" Landon repeated with a bitter laugh. "Like what? How to milk a cow?" The screen door of the farmhouse creaked open and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was wearing jeans, boots, and a plaid shirt with the sleeves rolled up. Her brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail, and her skin was tanned from long days in the sun. Landon put on his most charming smile, the one that had gotten him out of trouble countless times, and picked up his bags. "Hi there," he called. "I'm Landon. I believe my father arranged for me to stay here." The woman crossed her arms over her chest, looking him up and down with clear skepticism. "Hallie McKenna," she said. "And yes, your father called. Said you needed to learn some life lessons." Landon laughed uncomfortably. "That's one way to put it. Do you know anything about farming, Landon?" Hallie asked, not moving from her spot on the porch. "Not a thing," he admitted. "Have you ever done manual labor, construction, landscaping, anything physical at all?" Landon thought about his personal trainer at his gym in New York. "I work out 5 days a week." Hallie sighed and shook her head. "God help us," she muttered, then gestured for him to come up to the porch. "You'll be staying in the guest room upstairs. Bathrooms shared. Breakfast is at 5:30 a.m. 5:30, Landon repeated, aghast. "In the morning?" "That's generally when morning happens," Hallie said dryly. "We start work at 6. You miss breakfast, you work hungry until lunch." She turned and went back into the house, leaving the door open for him to follow. The inside of the farmhouse was clean and homey, with well-worn furniture that looked comfortable rather than stylish. The kitchen had an old stove and a large wooden table that could seat at least 8 people. "This is Mike," Hallie said, nodding toward a man sitting at the table drinking coffee. He was in his 60s, with a weathered face and calloused hands. "He helps run things around here." Mike barely looked up from his newspaper. "So you're the city boy," he said with a grunt. "I guess I am," Landon replied, trying to keep his tone light despite his growing irritation. "Your room's the second door on the right," Hallie said, pointing to a staircase. "Get settled and then come back down. We've got chores to finish before dinner." Landon stood there for a moment, unused to being dismissed so abruptly. In New York, people hung on his every word. Here he was clearly an unwelcome interruption to their routine. The guest room was simple: a double bed with a patchwork quilt, a wooden dresser, and a small desk by the window. It was about a quarter of the size of his closet back home. The window looked out over the fields, golden with what Landon assumed was wheat or corn, stretching as far as he could see. He sat on the edge of the bed, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. He was stuck here in the middle of nowhere with no phone, no car, and no way out unless he wanted to lose everything. "This can't be happening," he muttered, running his hands through his hair. But it was happening, and it was about to get much worse. When Landon came back downstairs, Hallie was waiting for him. She handed him a pair of work gloves. "First lesson," she said. "Everyone works here. Everyone contributes." "What exactly am I supposed to do?" Landon asked, reluctantly taking the gloves. "Today you're going to help Mike muck out the horse stalls," Hallie said, leading him out the back door toward the barn. "Muck out? What does that mean?" Hallie looked at him with a mix of disbelief and amusement. "It means cleaning out the horse manure." Landon stopped walking. "You want me to shovel horse shit? Are you kidding? Welcome to farm life." Hallie said with a shrug. "We all do it, even me." "But I don't know the first thing about horses," Landon protested. "You don't need to know about horses to shovel manure," Hallie said. "Mike will show you what to do." "And Landon," she added, her tone becoming serious, "out here we earn every breath. Your name, your money, your looks, none of that matters. What matters is what you can do with your hands." With that, she walked away, leaving Landon standing there with the work gloves in his hands. He looked down at them, then at the barn, then back at the farmhouse. He could walk away, he could call a taxi, if taxis even came out this far, and go back to the airport. He could tell his father to go to hell. But then what? Would he really cut Landon off completely? Could Landon survive without his trust fund, his job at Coal Corp, his apartment, his cars? He'd never had to try. With a deep sigh, Landon put on the gloves and headed toward the barn, where Mike was waiting with a pitchfork and a wheelbarrow. "Ready for your first real day of work?" Mike asked with a smirk. "Let's get this over with," Landon muttered. Mike explained the process, demonstrating how to separate the clean straw from the soiled bedding. The smell was overwhelming, and within minutes, Landon's designer shoes were covered in muck. After an hour, his back was aching, his hands were blistered despite the gloves, and he was sweating through his shirt. Mike, meanwhile, worked steadily beside him, seemingly unfazed by the physical labor. "How do you do this every day?" Landon asked, leaning on his pitchfork. "Been doing it for 40 years, Mike said simply. "You get used to it." "I don't think I could ever get used to this," Landon said, looking at the 3 stalls they'd cleaned, and the 5 that were still waiting. "That's the difference between you and folks like us," Mike said. "We don't have a choice. This is life." The words hit Landon harder than he expected. His whole life, he'd had choices, or at least the illusion of them. Even now, his punishment was something many people did every day just to survive. By the time they finished the stalls, it was nearly dinner time. Landon's muscles were screaming, and his hands were raw. He followed Mike back to the house too, tired to even complain. The kitchen smelled amazing, something homemade and savory that made Landon's stomach growl. Hallie was at the stove stirring a large pot. "Get cleaned up," she told them. "Dinner's in 10 minutes. Landon trudged upstairs to wash his hands and face. In the small bathroom mirror, he barely recognized himself. His hair was matted with sweat, his face smudged with dirt, and his eyes had a shell-shocked look. "What have I gotten myself into?" he whispered to his reflection. But as he made his way back downstairs to the kitchen table where Hallie was setting out bowls of beef, stew and a loaf of freshly baked bread, a strange thought occurred to him. For the first time in years, he'd worked until he was exhausted. He'd accomplished something tangible, even if that something was just cleaning horse stalls. "Eat up," Hallie said, not unkindly. "Tomorrow's going to be even harder." As Landon sat down to the most basic meal he'd had in years, he realized that this might be exactly what his father intended, to show him a world where people worked hard for simple rewards, where the measure of a day wasn't how much money you spent but how much work you accomplished. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the soreness and the indignation, a small part of him was curious about what tomorrow would bring. The rooster's crow jolted Landon awake at 5 a.m. For a moment, he couldn't remember where he was. The unfamiliar bed, the sunlight streaming through curtains that weren't his blackout blinds, the sound of activity downstairs. It all felt like a strange dream. Then the soreness hit him. Every muscle in his body ached from yesterday's work. Just sitting up made him wince. "This is only day 2, he muttered, rubbing his lower back. "I'm not going to survive this." But he forced himself to get dressed in the jeans and flannel shirt his assistant had packed for him. They felt stiff and unfamiliar against his skin. Nothing like the designer clothes he was used to. When he made his way downstairs, Hallie was already in the kitchen, making breakfast. The smell of bacon, eggs, and fresh coffee filled the air. "Morning," Hallie said without looking up from the stove. "Coffee's ready if you want some." Landon poured himself a cup, noticing that his hands were already blistered from just one day of work. "Do you always get up this early?" he asked, trying to make conversation. "Every day," Hallie replied, placing a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon on the table. "Farm doesn't run itself." Mike came in from outside, bringing the smell of hay and morning air with him. "Horses are fed," he reported, sitting down at the table. Tractor's acting up again, though. Hallie frowned. What's wrong with it now? Same problem as before. Transmission's shot, Mike said, helping himself to breakfast. We need a new one. We can't afford a new one, Hallie said, her voice tight. She glanced at Landon as if suddenly remembering he was there, and her expression closed off. We'll figure something out. Landon ate his breakfast in silence, listening. To them discuss farm problems he barely understood. It was clear that money was tight, something he had never had to worry about in his entire life. After breakfast, Hallie handed him a list of chores. You'll be working with me today, Mike's. Going to try to fix the tractor. The list was daunting. Mend fences in the north pasture, check irrigation lines, help move hay bales to the storage barn, and pick vegetables from the garden for dinner. All of this in one day? Landon asked, scanning the list with dismay. Welcome to farm life, Hallie said with a shrug. We work from sunup to sundown. They started with the fence mending, walking out to the north pasture with tools and supplies. Landon tried to match Hallie's pace, but she moved with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this her whole life. Watch how I do this, she said, showing him how to replace a broken fence post. It has to be sturdy enough to keep the cattle in. Landon tried to follow her example, but his first attempt was sloppy. The post wobbled when Hallie tested it. Not good enough, she said, pulling it out. If a cow leans on this, it'll break. Try again. Landon bit back a retort. In New York, he was used to giving orders, not taking them, and certainly not failing. Had simple tasks in front of someone who clearly thought he was useless. His second attempt was better, earning a nod from Hallie. That'll do, she said, which seemed to be the closest thing to praise he was going to get. They worked side by side for hours, mostly in silence. Occasionally, Hallie would answer Landon's questions about the farm, but she never volunteered information about herself. So how long have you been running this place? Landon asked as they moved on to checking the irrigation lines. My whole life, really, Hallie said, kneeling to fix a leaking connection, but officially since my dad died last year. I'm sorry, Landon said, and he meant it. That must have been hard. Hallie shrugged, but he could see the grief in her eyes. Life goes on. The farm doesn't stop just because someone dies. What about your brother, the one your father mentioned to my dad? Jake. Hallie's expression darkened. He's off chasing rodeo dreams, sends a check home when he remembers, which isn't often. So it's just you and Mike running this whole place? And a few seasonal workers during harvest, Hallie said, standing up. We manage, but Landon was beginning to see that managing meant working herself to exhaustion every day. He thought about his own complaints over the years, about boring business meetings, about press obligations, about having to show up for events he didn't care about. None of it compared to the daily grind of keeping a farm running. By midday, they had fixed most of the fence and checked the irrigation lines. Landon's hands were raw despite the gloves, and his back was screaming in protest. But he kept going, determined not to show weakness. They stopped briefly for lunch. Sandwiches and water that Hallie had packed in a cooler. Sitting in the shade of a large oak tree, Landon found himself staring at the vast expanse of land around them. It's beautiful out here, he said, surprised to realize he meant it. The golden fields swaying in the breeze, the wide open sky. It was so different from the concrete and glass of New York. Hallie looked at him with surprise, as if she hadn't expected him to notice. It is, she agreed. Most beautiful place in the world, if you ask me. How many acres do you have? 300, Hallie said. Been in my family for 3 generations. And you never wanted to leave? See the world? Hallie was quiet for a moment. I went to college in Lincoln, got a degree in agricultural business. Thought about staying in the city, getting a job with some big company. She looked out at the fields. But this place gets in your blood. It's not just land, it's home. Landon nodded, though he couldn't really understand. He'd never felt that connected to any place. His apartment in New York was just somewhere he slept between parties and meetings. The Cole family estate in the Hamptons was just a status symbol. None of it felt like home. After lunch, they moved hay bales to the storage barn, back-breaking work that had Landon drenched in sweat. Each bale weighed at least 50 pounds, and they had to move dozens of them. How do you do this every day? Landon gasped, setting down a bale and wiping his forehead. You get used to it, Hallie said, already picking up another bale. Besides, what's the alternative? If the work doesn't get done, the farm fails. Landon had never thought about work that way. In his world, if he didn't show up for a meeting or complete a project, someone else would handle it. There were always assistants, subordinates, people paid to make his life easier. Here, there was just the work and the people willing to do it. By the time they finished moving the hay, the sun was starting to set. They still had to pick vegetables for dinner, so they headed to the large garden behind the house. Grab those tomatoes, Hallie instructed, handing him a basket, and those zucchini over there. I'll get the lettuce and carrots. Landon found himself enjoying the simple task of picking ripe tomatoes. There was something satisfying about selecting the perfect ones, feeling their weight in his hand, smelling the distinctive tomato vine scent. These look amazing, he said, showing Hallie his basket. Nothing like homegrown, she agreed. You won't find tomatoes like these in a New York supermarket. As they walked back to the house with their harvest, Landon felt a strange sense of accomplishment. He'd worked harder today than he had in years, maybe ever, and he had something tangible to show for it. Repaired fences, organized hay bales, fresh vegetables for dinner. Back at the house, Mike was sitting on the porch, looking frustrated. Couldn't fix the tractor, he reported as they approached. We're going to need to get parts. Hallie's shoulders tensed. How much? At least $2,000 for the transmission parts, Mike said. Maybe more. Landon saw Hallie's face fall, though she tried to hide it. We'll figure it out, she said, the same phrase she'd used that morning, but with less conviction. I could. Help, Landon offered without thinking. I could call my father. No, Hallie said firmly, cutting him off. We don't need your charity. It's not charity, Landon protested. It's just, we've managed this farm for 3 generations without handouts from rich city folks, Hallie said, her voice sharp. We'll manage now. She went into the house, leaving Landon standing there with the basket of tomatoes. Mike gave him a sympathetic look. Don't take it personally, the older man said. She's proud and worried. The bank's been putting pressure on her since her dad died. The mortgage payments have gone up, and with crop prices down this year. Is the farm in trouble? Landon asked. Mike shrugged. Farms are always in trouble these days, but this one more than most. Don't tell her I told you, though. She doesn't want anyone to know, especially not someone connected to Richard Cole. Why? Especially not me. Your father and her father had some history, Mike said vaguely. Ask her about it sometime if you're brave enough. With that cryptic comment, Mike headed inside, leaving Landon to wonder what connection his father had to Hallie's family, and why she seemed so determined to reject any help from the Cole family. That night, dinner was a simple but delicious meal of grilled chicken and fresh vegetables from the garden. Landon was so hungry after the day's work that he ate 2 full plates, earning a raised eyebrow from Hallie. Farm work gives you an appetite, she commented. Everything tastes better when you've worked for it, Landon replied, surprising himself with the insight. After dinner, Hallie went to her office to work on farm accounts, and Mike went to his small house on the other side of the property, leaving Landon alone on the porch with a cup of coffee. The night was clear, the stars brighter than he'd ever seen them in New York. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the occasional lowing of cattle in the distance. For the first time since arriving, Landon didn't feel the desperate urge to escape. There was a peacefulness here that he'd never experienced before, a sense of being connected to something real. His thoughts were interrupted by the sound of a car coming up the driveway. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yard as the vehicle came to a stop. A man got out, tall, broad-shouldered, with a cowboy hat and boots. He walked with a slight limp, but carried himself with confidence. Hello? Landon called from the porch. Can I help you? The man looked up, clearly surprised to see someone he didn't recognize. I'm looking for Hallie, he said, his voice deep with a pronounced Western drawl. She's inside, Landon said, standing up. I'm Landon, by the way. I'm staying here for a while. The man's eyes narrowed slightly, taking in Landon's appearance. Even after a day of work, Landon knew he still looked out of place on a farm. Jake. McKenna, the man said. Hallie's brother. Before Landon could respond, the screen door opened behind him and Hallie stepped out. She froze when she saw Jake. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Nice to see you too, sis," Jake said with a grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thought I'd come home for a while. Rodeo circuit's slow this month." "You mean you're broke again?" Hallie said flatly. Jake shrugged, not denying it. "Family's family, right? You've always got room for your little brother." Hallie sighed, but Landon could see the complicated mix of emotions on her face: frustration, affection, worry. "Your room's still there," she said finally, "but if you stay, you work. We've got harvest coming up in a few weeks, and the tractors—" "Down? No problem," Jake said, grabbing a duffel bag from his car. "I see you've already replaced me with City Boy here." Landon felt himself bristle at the dismissive tone. "I'm not replacing anyone," he said. "I'm just here to learn about farming." Jake laughed. "Learn about farming? Why would someone like you need to learn about farming?" "Jake," Hallie warned. "Landon's a guest. His father is Richard Cole." Jake's expression changed immediately, his easy smile disappearing. "Cole? As in Cole Corp? The same Cole that tried to buy out Dad's farm when we were kids?" Landon blinked in surprise. "My father tried to buy this place. Not just buy it," Jake said bitterly. "Force us out. Threatened to dam up the creek that feeds our irrigation system if Dad didn't sell. Only backed off when Dad got the county involved." Landon looked at Hallie in shock. "I didn't know any of this." "It was a long time ago," Hallie said, though her tone suggested the wound was still fresh. "And it's not your fault what your father did." "So why is his son staying here now?" Jake demanded. "What's the game?" "There's no game," Hallie said firmly. "His father called, asked if Landon could stay here and learn about farming. Said he needed to learn some humility. I agreed because we need the money he's paying for room and board." Landon felt a twist in his gut at hearing it put so bluntly. Of course his father was paying for his stay. Hallie wouldn't have taken him in out of the goodness of her heart. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. "Well, this should be interesting," Jake said, looking Landon up and down with a smirk. "City Boy learns how the other half lives. How long have you been here?" "This was day 2, Landon admitted. "And how's that going for you?" Jake asked, his tone mocking. Landon thought about his aching muscles, his blistered hands, the overwhelming feeling of inadequacy as he struggled with tasks that Hallie performed with ease. But he also thought about the satisfaction of fixing that fence, the taste of tomatoes he'd picked himself, the peace of the starlit night. "It's harder than I expected," he said honestly. "But not in a bad way." Jake looked surprised at the answer, as if he'd expected Landon to complain. "Well, stick around, City Boy. Harvest is coming. You haven't seen hard work yet." With that, he headed into the house, leaving Landon and Hallie alone on the porch. "I'm sorry about that," Hallie said after a moment. "Jake's always been protective." "Is it true what he said? About my father trying to force your family out?" Hallie nodded slowly. "It was about 15 years ago. Cole Corp wanted to build a big resort complex in this area, needed our water rights. When Dad wouldn't sell, things got ugly." "I had no idea," Landon said, feeling a strange sense of shame for something he hadn't even known about. "Is that why you were so reluctant to have me here?" "Partly," Hallie admitted. "But we do need the money, and your father said you needed this experience. Why did you agree to it after what he did to your family?" Hallie was quiet for a long moment, looking out at the darkened fields. "Because my dad always said you should judge people by their own actions, not by their families. It seemed like the right thing to do, giving you a chance to prove what kind of man you are." The words hit Landon hard. His whole life he'd been judged by his family name. Doors had opened for him. Opportunities had been handed to him, all because he was a Cole. But here, that name meant nothing, or worse, it carried negative associations. "I'm not my father," he said quietly. "I know," Hallie replied. "That's why you're still here." She went back inside, leaving Landon alone with his thoughts and the vast, star-filled sky above. For the first time, he wondered if his father had sent him here not just as a punishment, but as an opportunity, a chance to become his own man, apart from the Cole name and fortune. And for the first time in years, he found himself wanting, to prove himself. Not to his father, not to the press, not to the business world, but to Hallie McKenna, the woman who looked at him and saw not a coal heir, but just Landon. A man who had yet to show his true worth. The first 2 weeks at Maple Glen passed in a blur of hard work and sore muscles for Landon. Each day brought new tasks, new challenges, and new aches in parts of his body he didn't know could hurt. But something else was happening too, something he hadn't expected. He was changing. His hands, once soft and manicured, were now calloused and strong. His skin had tanned from days in the sun. He'd lost weight, but gained muscle. And when he looked in the mirror, the man staring back at him seemed more real somehow, more substantial than the polished image he'd cultivated in New York. The farm was changing him in other ways too. He found himself waking before the alarm, eager to start the day. He took pride in completing tasks that would have seemed beneath him just weeks ago, and he found himself thinking less and less about his old life, except when Jake was around. Jake. McKenna made it his mission to remind Landon daily of who he was and where he came from. Every mistake Landon made was met with a sarcastic comment about rich boy problems. Every conversation somehow circled back to the Cole family's wealth and privilege. "Don't let him get to you," Mike advised one afternoon as they repaired a broken tractor part together. Jake's always had a chip on his shoulder, even as a kid. "Why does he hate me so much?" Landon asked, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I never did anything to him." "It's not about you," Mike said, adjusting a bolt. "It's about what you represent, money, power, the kind of life he thinks he deserves but never had." "But Hallie doesn't seem to hate me," Landon pointed out. Mike smiled knowingly. "No, she doesn't, does she?" Landon felt his face grow warm, and it had nothing to do with the summer heat. Over the past 2 weeks, something had been changing between him and Hallie. The frosty distance she'd kept at first had gradually thawed. They worked well together, anticipating each other's needs without having to speak. And in the evenings, they'd started sitting on the porch together, watching the sunset and talking. He'd learned about her college years, her dreams for the farm, her favorite books. He'd told her about his travels, his few real friends in New York, his complicated relationship with his father. They never discussed the past conflict between their families, but it hung in the air between them, an unspoken boundary neither was ready to cross. "She's just being nice because her father taught her to be polite to guests," Landon said, not meeting Mike's eyes. "Hallie doesn't do anything she doesn't want to do," Mike said with a chuckle. "If she's being nice to you, it's because she wants to be. Always been that way, stubborn as a mule, but with a heart bigger than this whole farm." Landon didn't know what to say to that, so he focused on the task at hand. But Mike's words stayed with him, a warm ember in his chest that he didn't dare examine too closely. That evening, as Landon helped Hallie prepare dinner, he found himself watching her. The confident way she moved around the kitchen, the slight furrow in her brow as she concentrated on chopping vegetables, the wisp of hair that had escaped, her ponytail and curled against her neck. "What?" she asked, catching him staring. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just thinking about how different this is from my life in New York." "Missing your fancy restaurants and nightclubs?" she teased. "Actually, no," Landon replied honestly. "This feels more real somehow. Making food with your own hands, eating what you've grown. There's something, I don't know, satisfying about it." Hallie looked surprised, then pleased. "Most city folks can't wait to get back to their takeout and delivery services." "I'm not most city folks," Landon said with a smile. "No," Hallie agreed softly. "You're not." The moment was interrupted by Jake's arrival in the kitchen. He looked between them, eyes narrowing at their proximity. "Cozy," he commented, grabbing a beer from the refrigerator. "What's for dinner?" "Chicken casserole," Hallie said, her tone changing, becoming more businesslike. "It'll be ready in 20 minutes. "Great," Jake said, leaning against the counter. "By the way, I ran into Tom Wilson in town today. He said the bank's called a meeting for next week, something about loan restructuring." Hallie's hands stilled. For a moment, her shoulders tensing. "Did he say anything else?" Jake shrugged. "Just that it didn't sound good. You know how these banks are, always looking for ways to squeeze more money out of farmers." "We're making the payments," Hallie said, resuming her chopping with more force than necessary. "They have no reason to change the terms." "They don't need a reason, sis," Jake said, his voice bitter. "They've got all the power and they know it." Landon watched Hallie's face, seeing the worry she was trying to hide. He wanted to offer help, to assure her that he could make one phone call and solve all her financial problems. But he knew she wouldn't accept that kind of help, especially not from a Cole. After dinner, Jake went into town and Mike retired to his house, leaving Landon and Hallie alone. They sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies blink in the growing darkness. "Is the bank situation serious?" Landon asked quietly. Hallie sighed. "It could be. When Dad died, the terms of the mortgage changed. The interest rate went up and they shortened the repayment period. We've been making the payments, but it's been tight. If they change the terms again, would selling some of the land help?" Landon suggested cautiously. "This land has been in my family for generations," Hallie said, her voice firm. "I'm not selling an inch of it." "I understand," Landon said, though part of him didn't. In his world, everything had a price. Everything could be bought and sold. The idea of being so attached to a piece of land that you'd sacrifice everything to keep it was foreign to him. But looking at Hallie's face in the dim porch light, he was beginning to understand. This farm wasn't just property to her. It was her heritage, her home, her future. It was part of who she was. "We'll figure something out," Hallie said, echoing her familiar refrain, but with more determination than before. "We always do." Landon nodded, not trusting himself to speak, because what he wanted to say, that he would help her, that he would protect her farm, that he would do anything to keep that worry from her eyes, would only push her away. The next morning, Landon woke to the sound of raised voices coming from downstairs. He quickly dressed and made his way to the kitchen, where he found Hallie and Jake in the middle of an argument. "You can't be serious," Hallie was saying, her face flushed with anger. "After everything that family did to us?" "It's just business, Hal," Jake replied, his voice maddeningly calm. "And it's a good offer." "What's going on?" Landon asked, stepping into the room. Both siblings turned to look at him, their expressions so different. Jake smug, Hallie distressed. "Perfect timing," Jake said. "We were just discussing your father's latest offer." "My father's offer," Landon repeated, confused. "What are you talking about?" "Oh, you don't know." Jake raised his eyebrows in mock surprise. "Your father's company has made an offer to buy Maple Glen. Again, seems like some things never change." Landon felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "That can't be right. My father wouldn't..." "Wouldn't what?" Jake challenged. "Wouldn't go behind your back? Wouldn't try to take advantage of our financial situation? Wouldn't lie to you? Which part exactly do you find hard to believe?" "Jake, that's enough," Hallie said sharply. She turned to Landon, her eyes searching his face. "Did you know about this?" "No," Landon said immediately. "I swear, Hallie, I had no idea." She looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I believe you," she said quietly. "Well, I don't," Jake said. "This whole thing stinks. You show up here, play the humble farm boy, get close to Hallie, and suddenly Coldcorp is making offers on our land. That's one hell of a coincidence." "It's not what you think," Landon protested. "I was sent here as a punishment, not as some kind of corporate spy." "A punishment," Jake repeated with a harsh laugh. "Poor little rich boy forced to live like the rest of us for a few weeks. How terrible for you." "Jake," Hallie warned, "this isn't helping." "What exactly is the offer?" Landon asked, trying to keep his voice level despite the anger and confusion churning inside him. Jake pulled a letter from his pocket and slapped it on the table. "See for yourself. Your father's offering to buy the farm for 20%. Above market value. Says it's a gesture of goodwill to make up for past misunderstandings." Landon picked up the letter, skimming the formal language. It was indeed from Coldcorp, signed by his father. The date at the top was just 3 days ago. "I don't understand," Landon murmured. "He sent me here to learn, not for this." "Maybe you were learning," Jake suggested with a sneer. "Learning about our weaknesses, our financial problems, feeding information back to Daddy so he could swoop in at the perfect moment." "That's not true," Landon said firmly, though doubt crept into his mind. His father was capable of that kind of manipulation. He'd seen it in business many times. But to use his own son that way... I haven't had any contact with my father since I arrived here. Like we'd believe that, Jake scoffed. You Coles stick together. We're not selling, Hallie said, cutting through their argument. Her voice was calm but resolute. I don't care what the offer is. This farm is not for sale. Jake threw up his hands in frustration. Hallie, be reasonable. We could pay off all our debts, set up a new life somewhere else. This place is killing you. The work, the stress, the constant struggle. This is our home, Hallie said simply. I'm not leaving. It's Dad's home, Jake corrected. And Mom's. They're gone now. We don't have to stay here out of some misplaced loyalty to them. I'm staying because I love this place, Hallie said, her voice rising. Because it matters to me. If you want to take the money and run, Jake, that's your choice. But my half of the farm is not for sale. Not to Colcorp, not to anyone. Jake looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. You're making a mistake, he said quietly. A big one. With that, he stormed out of the kitchen, the screen door slamming behind him. Hallie sank into a chair at the table, looking suddenly tired. I need to call my father, Landon said. Find out what's really going on. There's no phone here, Hallie reminded him, and I'm not sure I want you using the one in town for this conversation. Then I'll drive to Omaha, Landon said decisively. I need to talk to him face to face. With what car? Hallie asked, almost smiling despite the situation. You came here without one, remember? Landon ran a hand through his hair in frustration. Then I'll borrow yours. Please, Hallie. I need to sort this out. Hallie studied his face, as if trying to read his thoughts. You really didn't know about this, did you? No, Landon said firmly. I'd never be part of something like that, not after being here, getting to know you, seeing what this place means to you. Something in his voice must have convinced her, because she nodded slowly and reached into her pocket, pulling out a set of keys. My truck's not much, she said, handing him the keys, but it'll get you to Omaha and back. There's a satellite office for Colcorp there. I saw it in the letter's letterhead. Thank you, Landon said, closing his hand around the keys. I'll find out what's going on, I promise. Just be back by nightfall, Hallie said. We've got the South Field to finish tomorrow and I need your help. Landon smiled, touched by her practical concern, even in the midst of this crisis. I'll be back, he promised. The drive to Omaha took nearly 2 hours, giving Landon plenty of time to think and to fume. If his father had indeed been using him as a pawn in some corporate land grab, it would be the final break between them. He'd never forgive that kind of manipulation. But why would his father do it? Colcorp was a global technology empire, not an agricultural company. What interest could they possibly have in a struggling farm in Nebraska? The Colcorp satellite office was in a sleek glass building in downtown Omaha. Landon parked Hallie's battered truck in the visitor's lot, acutely aware of how out of place it looked among the luxury cars. He was equally out of place in his work. Clothes and boots, but he didn't care. He wasn't here as Landon Cole, heir to the Cole fortune. He was here as Landon, friend of Hallie McKenna, defender of Maple Glen Farm. The receptionist did a double take when he gave his name, but quickly ushered him into a private office to make a video call to New York. Minutes later, his father's face appeared on the screen. Landon, Richard Cole said, looking genuinely surprised. This is unexpected. Why aren't you at the farm? Because I just found out that you're trying to buy it, Landon said bluntly. What the hell are you doing, Dad? Richard's expression didn't change. I'm making a business decision, he said coolly. The McKenna farm sits on land that would be perfect for our new research facility. Clean air, space for expansion, good tax incentives from the state. You sent me there to learn humility, Landon reminded him, not to be part of some corporate takeover. The two aren't mutually exclusive, Richard replied. You were sent there to learn, yes, but your presence also gave us insights into the current state of the farm, its financial situation. Landon felt sick. So Jake was right. You were using me. I was giving you an opportunity to be useful to the company for once, Richard corrected. And from what I hear, you've actually been working hard there. That's a pleasant surprise. These people took me in, Landon said, his voice tight with anger. They've taught me, fed me, treated me like family, and all along you were planning to take their land. It's business, Landon, Richard said dismissively. Nothing personal. They'll be well compensated. It is personal to them, Landon insisted. That farm has been in their family for generations. It's their home, their heritage. Sentiment doesn't pay the bills, Richard said. They're struggling financially. Our offer is more than fair. They're not selling, Landon said firmly. Hallie made that clear. Everyone has a price, Richard replied with a small smile. We just haven't found hers yet. Landon felt a surge of protectiveness at his father's casual dismissal of Hallie's principles. No, Dad, you're wrong. Some things aren't for sale. Richard's eyes narrowed. You've been there, what, 3 weeks? And suddenly you're an expert on farming and land rights? This isn't a game, Landon. This is business. Something you've never taken seriously. Maybe because I've seen how you do business, Landon shot back. Manipulation, pressure tactics, using your own son as a spy. Is that the Cole way? Is that what you wanted me to learn? You're being dramatic, Richard said coldly. This is a straightforward business transaction. The McKenna farm is perfect for our needs, and we're offering a generous price. End of story. Not end of story, Landon said, leaning closer to the screen. I won't be part of this. If you go after their farm, you're going against me too. Richard looked genuinely surprised. Against you? And what exactly does that mean? What can you do? I can tell the truth, Landon said simply. To the press, to the local community, to our shareholders. How do you think it will look when people find out that the great Richard Cole is trying to force a struggling family farm out of business? Again? You wouldn't dare, Richard said, but there was a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Try me, Landon said. I've got nothing to lose. You've already threatened to cut me off, and for what it's worth, these past weeks at Maple Glen have shown me that I can survive without your money. I can work, Dad. Real work. The kind that actually matters. Father and son stared at each other through the screen, the tension between them palpable even across the digital connection. You care about this woman, Richard said finally, understanding dawning in his eyes. The McKenna girl. Landon didn't deny it. Her name is Hallie, and yes, I care about her farm, about the life she's fighting to preserve. Richard was silent for a long moment, studying his son's face. I've never seen you like this, he said at last. Standing up for something other than your own pleasure or comfort. Maybe because you've never given me anything worth standing up for, Landon replied. To his surprise, a small smile crossed his father's face. Perhaps I've underestimated you, Richard said, and this experience. Does that mean you'll withdraw the offer? Landon pressed. I'll consider it, Richard said carefully, but I want something in return. What? Stay until harvest as we agreed, Richard said. Complete what you started. Show me that this change in you isn't just a passing phase or a romantic infatuation. Landon had to stop himself from laughing. Stay at Maple Glen? That was hardly a punishment anymore. Fine, he agreed. I'll stay. But I want your word that you'll leave Maple Glen alone. Not just now, but in the future too. Richard nodded slowly. You have my word, he said. Provided you stick to our agreement. I will, Landon promised, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. One more thing, Richard added. Don't tell the McKennas about this conversation. Let them believe the offer has simply been withdrawn. It's better that way. Landon wanted to argue, to insist on complete honesty with Hallie, but he understood the practicality of his father's request. Telling Hallie that he'd intervened on her behalf might seem like another rich man's gesture, something she'd resist on principle. All right, he agreed reluctantly. But this is the last time I lie for you, Dad. Richard inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the boundary. Goodbye, Landon. I look forward to seeing you at harvest. The screen went dark, leaving Landon alone. In the quiet office, he sat there for a moment, processing what had just happened. For the first time in his life, he'd stood up to his father, not in a tantrum or a rebellion, but in defense of something he truly believed in. And even more, surprisingly, his father had listened. The drive back to Maple Glen was quieter, Landon's mind busy with thoughts of what to tell Hallie. By the time he pulled into the farm's driveway, the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the fields. He found Hallie sitting on the porch steps, waiting for him. She stood as he approached, her face questioning. The offer's been withdrawn, Landon said simply. Coal Corp is no longer interested in Maple Glen. Hallie studied his face as if looking for the truth behind his words. Just like that? Why? Landon shrugged, trying to look casual. I explained that the farm wasn't for sale, that you'd never sell no matter the price. I guess they decided not to waste their time. And that's it? Hallie asked skeptically. No pressure, no threats, just a simple withdrawal? Sometimes things are simpler than they seem, Landon said, not meeting her eyes. He hated lying to her, even by omission, but he'd made a promise to his father, and right now, all that mattered was that Maple Glen was safe. Hallie stepped closer to him, close, enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used. Thank you, she said softly, for whatever you did. I didn't do much, Landon said honestly. Just told the truth. Still, Hallie insisted, her eyes warm, it means a lot that you stood up for us, for the farm. For you, Landon thought, but didn't say. Instead, he simply nodded, returning her keys. Your truck drives well, he said, changing the subject. Though the brake pedal sticks a bit, Hallie laughed. I've been meaning to fix that, she said. Add it to the mile-long list of repairs this place needs. Maybe I could help with some of those, Landon suggested. I'm not exactly a mechanic, but I'm learning fast. Yes, you are, Hallie agreed, looking at him with something like pride. You're not the same man who showed up here a few weeks ago. Is that a good thing? Landon asked, half joking, half serious. Hallie smiled, and it transformed her face, making her look younger, lighter. A very good thing, she said, and turned to go inside. Landon stood there for a moment, watching her go, feeling a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the setting sun. Whatever happened next, with the farm, with his father, with his life back in New York, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't the same man anymore, and he never wanted to be that man again. The weeks leading up to harvest were the busiest Landon had ever experienced. Every day brought new tasks, checking the crops, preparing the equipment, fixing whatever broke down that day, and always the endless physical labor. But he found himself enjoying the rhythm of farm life, the satisfaction of falling into bed exhausted at night, knowing he'd accomplished something real. His relationship with Hallie had changed too. The professional distance she'd maintained at first had given way to something warmer, more personal. They worked side by side during the day, their bodies moving in easy synchronization, and in the evenings, they spent time on the porch, talking about everything and nothing. Jake remained, suspicious, watching their growing closeness with narrowed eyes, but he'd backed off somewhat after the Coal Corp offer was withdrawn. He still made the occasional cutting remark about Landon's background, but there was less venom in his voice now. One evening, about a week before harvest was set to begin, Landon found Hallie in the barn, struggling with a stubborn piece of equipment. Need a hand? He offered, stepping into the warm, hay-scented space. Hallie looked up, blowing a strand of hair out of her face. This combine attachment is stuck, she said. We need it working by next week or we're in trouble. Landon knelt beside her, examining the rusted metal. Let me try, he said, taking the wrench from her hand. Their fingers brushed, and he felt that now familiar jolt of awareness. Together they worked on the equipment, Hallie explaining what each part did, Landon applying muscle where needed. It was nearly dark by the time they finished, but the attachment was finally ready for use. We make a good team, Landon said, wiping grease from his hands with an old rag. We do, Hallie agreed quietly. She was standing close to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her brown eyes, the small scar on her chin from a childhood accident she'd told him about. Hallie, he said, his voice low, there's something I've been wanting to— There you are, Jake's voice interrupted from the barn doorway. Mike's looking for you, Hal. Something about the irrigation pump. Hallie stepped back, breaking the moment. I'd better go see what he needs, she said, not quite meeting Landon's eyes. Thanks for your help with this. Landon watched her go, feeling the loss of her presence like a physical thing. When she was gone, Jake lingered, leaning against the barn door with his arms crossed. You should be careful, Jake said, his voice neutral for once. Careful about what? Landon asked, though he knew perfectly well what Jake meant. My sister, Jake replied. She's not like the women you're used to. She takes things to heart. I know that, Landon said, bristling at the implication that he might hurt Hallie. Do you? Jake pushed away from the door, walking closer. Because, from where I'm standing, this looks like a summer fling for you. Something to tell your rich friends about when you go back to New York. Oh, I had this quaint experience with a farm girl in Nebraska, he mimicked in a pompous voice. Landon felt his temper rise but forced himself to stay calm. You don't know anything about what I feel for your sister, he said evenly. I know you're leaving after harvest, Jake said bluntly. Back to your penthouse and your fancy parties, and Hallie will still be here, trying to keep this place afloat. The words hit Landon like a punch to the gut because they contained a painful truth. He was scheduled to leave after harvest. His father expected him back in New York. His life, his real life, was waiting for him, wasn't it? It's not that simple, Landon said more to himself than to Jake. Actually, it is, Jake replied. You're either staying or you're going, and if you're going, you should keep your distance. Hallie's had enough people walk out on her. With that, he turned and left, leaving Landon alone in the darkening barn with thoughts he'd been avoiding for weeks. The truth was, he hadn't thought beyond harvest. He'd been living day to day, absorbed in the work and in his growing feelings for Hallie. But Jake was right. His time at Maple Glen had an expiration date. His father expected him to return to New York, to take his place at Coal Corp, to resume the life he'd left behind. But was that what he wanted anymore? That night, Landon lay awake in his small room, listening to the sounds of the farm, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the cornfields, the occasional hoot of an owl. Sounds that had become familiar, comforting. Sounds of home. The realization hit him with startling clarity. This place felt more like home than anywhere he'd ever lived. And Hallie, strong, stubborn, beautiful Hallie, felt more like family than his own father ever had. But what could he offer her? He wasn't a farmer. He didn't know the first thing about running a place like Maple Glen. And despite his father's apparent change of heart about buying the farm, Landon knew that Richard Cole wouldn't be happy about his son choosing this life over the one planned for him. The next morning at breakfast, Hallie announced that they needed to go into town for supplies before harvest. I thought Landon could come with me, she said, not quite looking at him. We need feed for the animals, some parts for the combine, and groceries to stock up for harvest week. Fine by me, Mike said, helping himself to more bacon. I've got plenty to do here. I'll stay too, Jake added. Got some fence to mend in the south pasture. So Landon found himself in Hallie's truck, driving the now familiar route to the small town 20 miles from the farm. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the radio playing softly in the background. You've been quiet since yesterday, Hallie said finally, glancing at him. Everything okay? Landon hesitated. Jake and I had a talk, he admitted. About what? Hallie asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. About me leaving after harvest, Landon said. About us. Hallie's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but her expression remained calm. And what did my brother have to say about that? He thinks I'm going to hurt you, Landon said honestly, that this is just temporary for me. Hallie was quiet, for a long moment. Is he right? She asked finally, her voice carefully neutral. I don't know, Landon admitted. I know what I feel for you is real, more real than anything I've ever felt, but my life is in New York. My job, your future, Hallie finished for him. I understand, Landon. I've always understood that. Have you? He asked, studying her profile as she drove. Because I'm not sure I have. Not until recently. They reached town before Hallie could respond, and the conversation was put on hold as they ran their errands. At the feed store, at the hardware shop, at the grocery store, Landon watched as Hallie greeted everyone by name, asked about families, shared news of the upcoming harvest. This was her community, her world. And somehow, without realizing it, it had started to become his world too. Their last stop was the bank. Hallie had been putting it off, Landon could tell, but finally she parked in front of the small brick building. I need to speak with Mr. Wilson about the loan, she said, her voice tight. You can wait in the truck if you want. I'll come with you, Landon said firmly. if that's okay. Hallie looked surprised but nodded. Together they walked into the bank, where a balding man in his 50s greeted them from behind a desk. "Hallie," Tom Wilson said, standing to shake her hand. "And?" "Mr. Cole, this is a surprise. You know who I am?" Landon asked, caught off guard. Wilson smiled thinly. "Everyone in town knows who you are, Mr. Cole. News travels fast around here." Hallie shifted uncomfortably. "I'm here about the loan, Tom. I got your message about a meeting." "Yes," Wilson said, gesturing for them to sit. "I'm afraid I don't. Have good news. The bank is restructuring all of its agricultural loans, and yours, well, given the past late payments under your father's management and the current market conditions. Just tell me what's happening, Tom," Hallie said bluntly. Wilson sighed. "The interest rate is going up, significantly, and we're requiring a balloon payment of $20,000 by the end of harvest season." Hallie's face paled. "20,000? That's impossible. You know what our harvest projections are." "I'm sorry, Hallie," Wilson said, and he did look genuinely regretful. "It's out of my hands. The decision came from corporate." Landon listened to the conversation with growing anger. This was exactly the kind of financial manipulation his father's company often employed, squeezing people when they were most vulnerable, forcing them to sell when they had no other options. "What happens if the payment isn't made?" he asked. Though he already knew the answer, Wilson glanced between them. "Then the bank will begin foreclosure proceedings," he said quietly. "Hallie would have 90 days to vacate the property." Hallie stood up abruptly. "Thank you for your time, Tom," she said, her voice steady despite the shock Landon knew she must be feeling. "I'll need to review this with my lawyer." Outside in the truck, Hallie sat with her hands gripping the steering wheel, though she hadn't started the engine. "They're trying to force us out," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just like 15 years ago, different tactics, same result." "We'll figure something out," Landon said, echoing her familiar phrase back to her. Hallie looked at him, a sad smile touching her lips. "There's no we in this, Landon. This is my problem, my farm, my fight." "I want to help," Landon insisted. "With what?" "Your father's money." Hallie shook her head. "I told you from the beginning. I don't want charity from the Coles." "It wouldn't be charity," Landon argued. "It would be an investment." "In what?" Hallie challenged. "A struggling farm that hasn't turned a real profit in years. Be realistic, Landon. No investor would touch Maple Glen right now." She was right, and they both knew it. From a purely business perspective, Maple Glen was a bad investment. The equipment was outdated, the margins were thin, and the bank was circling like a vulture. But Landon wasn't thinking like a businessman anymore. He was thinking like a man who had found something worth fighting for. "What if I stayed?" he asked suddenly. Hallie looked at him in confusion. "What?" "After harvest," Landon clarified. "What if I didn't go back to New York? What if I stayed here at Maple Glen?" Hallie stared at him for a long moment. "You can't be serious," she said finally. "You're not a farmer, Landon." "I could learn," he said. "I've already learned so much in just a few weeks, and I could bring other skills, business knowledge, connections, marketing ideas." "And what about your life in New York?" Hallie asked. "Your job at your father's company, your friends, your apartment, everything you've ever known." Landon found himself smiling. "None of that feels real anymore," he admitted. The farm, the work this feels real." Hallie's eyes softened, but she shook her head. "You're caught up in the moment," she said gently. "The harvest, the bank threat, it's all very dramatic. But in a few weeks, when the dust settles, you'll remember who you really are." "I know exactly who I am," Landon said firmly. "For the first time in my life, I see myself clearly. And I see you, Hallie. I see what we could be together." Hallie started the truck, her hands trembling slightly. "Let's get these supplies back to the farm," she said, avoiding his gaze. "We've got a lot of work to do before harvest." The drive back was silent, each of them lost in their own thoughts. But Landon's mind was made up. Somehow, he was going to save Maple Glen, and if possible, he was going to build a future there with Hallie. The next day, Landon made an excuse to borrow the truck again, saying he needed to pick up some personal items in town. Instead, he drove to Omaha to the Coal Corp satellite office. This time, he didn't request a video call with his father. Instead, he asked to speak to the regional manager. An hour later, he was back on the road to Maple Glen, a plan forming in his mind. It was risky and Hallie might be furious with him, but he had to try. Harvest week arrived with a flurry of activity. Additional workers were hired from town, the equipment was given one final check, and everyone prepared for the long days ahead. The entire farm hummed with anticipation and anxiety. A good harvest could mean survival for another year. A poor one could mean disaster. Landon worked alongside everyone else, driving the combine, hauling grain, doing whatever needed to be done. He found himself taking pride in the golden wheat flowing into the trucks, the satisfying weight of a job well done at the end of each exhausting day. Hallie was everywhere at once, directing operations, troubleshooting problems, pushing through her own exhaustion to keep everything moving smoothly. She barely had time to speak to Landon beyond giving instructions, but he caught her watching him sometimes, a thoughtful expression on her face. 3 days into harvest, disaster struck. The repaired combine broke down completely, a critical part failing in the middle of the biggest field. "We can't finish without it," Mike said grimly, examining the damaged machine. "And we can't afford a new part, not with what we've harvested so far." "We have to try," Hallie insisted. "Jake, take the truck into town. See if Henderson's has the part or if they can order it." Jake nodded, already heading for the truck. But Landon stopped him. "Wait," he said. "I have a better idea." All eyes turned to him, curious and skeptical. "I made a call last week," Landon explained, "to a farming equipment company in Omaha. They're sending a new combine. It should be here this afternoon." "A new combine," Hallie repeated, disbelief in her voice. "Those cost over $100,000. "It's a rental," Landon clarified quickly. "For the rest of harvest, they're giving us a special rate." "We can't afford even a special rate right now," Hallie said, shaking her head. "It's already paid for," Landon said. "Consider it my contribution to the harvest." "Landon," Hallie began, her expression a mix of gratitude and discomfort. "We can't accept—" "Yes, we can," Jake interrupted surprisingly. "We need to finish this harvest, Hal. We can worry about pride later." Hallie looked between her brother and Landon, then nodded reluctantly. "Thank you," she said simply. The new combine arrived as promised, a gleaming machine that made quick work of the remaining fields. With its help, they finished the harvest, 2 days ahead of schedule, bringing in more wheat than Hallie had projected. The evening after the final field was harvested, everyone gathered in the farmhouse kitchen for a celebration dinner. The atmosphere was lighter than it had been in weeks, the relief of a successful harvest temporarily overshadowing the looming bank deadline. "To a good harvest," Mike proposed, raising his glass. "And to Landon," Jake added unexpectedly. "Who saved our bacon with that combine?" Landon felt himself flush at the unexpected praise from Jake. "Just doing my part," he said modestly. Hallie was quiet through most of the meal, though she smiled and participated in the conversation. But Landon could sense something was on her. Mind after dinner, she asked him to join her on the porch. The night was clear and cool, the first hint of fall in the air. "Harvest is over," she said, leaning against the porch railing. "Your father will be expecting you back in New York." "Probably," Landon agreed, standing beside her. "And," she prompted, glancing at him. "And I'm not going," Landon said simply. Hallie turned to face him fully. "Landon, you can't just—" "I can," he interrupted gently. "And I am. I've already called my father, told him I won't be coming back to work for Coal Corp." "How did he take it?" Hallie asked. "About as well as you'd expect," Landon said with a wry smile. "But he'll get over it, he always does." "And what will you do?" Hallie asked. "You can't stay here indefinitely, living in my guest room, working for room and board." "Actually, I was thinking of becoming a partner," Landon said casually. Hallie's eyes widened. "A partner in the farm?" "Landon, that's—" "Just hear me out," he said quickly. "I've been working on something these past few weeks. A way to save Maple Glen without charity, without my father's money." He explained his plan. A proposal to turn part of the farm into an agricultural research station, leased to a university that was looking for farmland to conduct sustainable farming studies. The lease would provide steady income, he explained. Enough to make the balloon payment and stabilize the farm finances. And they would only need about 50 acres, the northeast section, which you said isn't as productive anyway. Hallie listened in stunned silence. How did you arrange all this? She asked when he finished. I used to be a businessman, remember? Landon said with a smile. I still have some connections, and I have a friend from college who works in the ERP, agricultural department at the university. I called in a favor. Why would you do this? Hallie asked softly. All of this, the combine, the lease arrangement, staying here instead of going back to your life. Landon took a deep breath. It was time for complete honesty. Because I love you, he said simply. Because I love this place. Because for the first time in my life, I feel like I'm where I'm meant to be. Hallie's eyes glistened in the porch light. You love me, she repeated, as if testing the words. Yes, Landon said. I don't expect you to feel the same way. I know I have a lot to prove, to you, to Jake, to myself, but I want the chance to try, to build something here, with you. Hallie was quiet for a long moment, and Landon felt his heart pounding in his chest. Had he misread everything? Had he presumed too much? Then she stepped forward and placed her hand over his where it rested on the porch railing. I do feel the same way, she said softly. I've been fighting it because I thought you'd leave, because I couldn't bear to start something that was doomed to end. I'm not leaving, Landon promised. Not unless you want me to. I don't, Hallie said, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. I want you to stay. Landon pulled her into his arms, holding her close, breathing in the scent of her hair, the warmth of her body against his. It felt right. It felt like coming home. So, he said, his voice light despite the emotion thick in his throat. Partners, Hallie agreed, looking up at him with eyes full of promise. In every way, their lips met in a kiss that felt both inevitable and surprising, the culmination of weeks of growing feelings, and the beginning of something. Yes, from the doorway, unseen by either of them, Jake watched with a mixture of resignation and approval. He'd been wrong about Landon Cole. They all had. The man wasn't just passing through. He was planting roots as deep and lasting as the crops in their fields. 6 months later, Richard Cole arrived at Maple Glen for his first visit. He found a farm transformed, not into a corporate facility as he'd once planned, but into a thriving family operation with a new research station taking shape in the northeast fields. He found his son transformed too, tanned, fit, dressed, in work clothes that showed honest wear, a quiet confidence in his bearing that had never been there before. So this is your new life, Richard said, looking around the farmyard with carefully neutral expression. This is my life, Landon corrected. Nothing new about it anymore. They walked the property, Landon pointing out improvements, explaining the research partnership, outlining plans for the future. Richard listened more than he spoke, observing his son with new eyes. At the kitchen table that evening, Richard sat with Landon, Hallie, Jake, and Mike, eating a meal prepared from food grown on the farm. The conversation flowed easily, without the tension he'd expected. I have to admit, Richard said finally, setting down his fork, when you told me you were staying here, I thought you'd lost your mind. But seeing this place, seeing you here. He paused, choosing his words carefully. I think I understand now. What do you understand? Landon asked. That some things can't be measured in dollars and cents, Richard replied. That some wealth doesn't show up on balance sheets. Hallie, sitting beside Landon, reached over and took his hand. The simple gold band on her finger caught the light, evidence of another partnership recently formed. Will you stay for the wedding next month? She asked Richard. We'd like you to be there. Richard looked surprised at the invitation, then genuinely moved. I'd be honored, he said. Later, as Richard prepared to leave, he took something from his pocket and handed it to Landon, a small brass key. What's this? Landon asked, turning it over in his hand. To the new barn, Richard said. My wedding gift to you both. It's being delivered next week, state of the art, with solar panels on the roof and all the equipment you'll need for the next 10 years. Landon stared at his father in disbelief. Dad, I don't know what to say. Say you'll invite me back for harvest next year, Richard replied. I'd like to see how it's done properly. You're welcome anytime, Landon said, meaning it. "This is your family's home too now." Richard nodded, a rare smile softening his usually stern face. As he drove away, Landon stood with Hallie on the porch, watching until the car disappeared. Down the long dirt driveway. "Think he'll really come back for harvest?" Hallie asked, leaning into Landon's side. "I think he might," Landon said. "He's changing too, in his own way." They turned to look out over the fields, now dormant for winter, but ready to burst into life again in spring. Their fields, their future, their home. "The weight of dirt," Hallie mused, echoing a phrase Landon had used once to describe the responsibility of caring for the land. "It's heavy sometimes, but worth every ounce," Landon said, drawing her closer. And as the sun set over Maple Glen Farm, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Landon Cole, once the playboy heir to a global corporation, now a farmer with dirt under his fingernails and love in his heart, felt truly, completely wealthy for the first time in his life.